So when we left off yesterday, we'd kind of gone over the 9 things that river civilizations are going to use that river for. Things like it being a water source, a food source, trade, transportation, irrigation, all that kind of stuff. One of the unique things to Egypt, though, we said was that papyrus plant. So you can kind of see it, these long stalks that it has. It looks a lot bigger in person than it does in this picture. The plant itself grows to about 5 feet in height. But they use that stalk to make paper. What they would do is they would take that kind of thick stalk that the plant had, and they would split it into long strips. It has a very kind of a stringy fiber to it. It's very similar to if you've ever, like with celery. Okay, maybe you've snapped a piece of celery and it's got those stringy fibers in it. It's very similar to that, except that it's not quite as thick as celery is or as hard as celery is. But what they do is they would pull that stalk into very thin strips and lay those strips perpendicular to each other. You can kind of see where they've laid them vertical, then laid a row horizontal against it. They would then they'd lay those strips out, pound them together with a wooden mallet, and then let them dry. Once it dried, it made kind of like a thick, crinkly type paper. So I have a sample of papyrus here that Ms. McClellan will bring around to you and let you kind of see it and feel it a little bit. But you're going to notice it feels kind of brittle. But if you rub your fingers on it, you'll be able to feel the little kind of stringy fibers that it has on it. But that was the first style of paper that they would use. It's a lot more convenient than the clay tablets that the Mesopotamians would use to write on. Yeah, so obviously with that paper, it was a little bit more convenient to carry around. You can roll it into a scroll. It wasn't as heavy as those clay tablets were or anything like that. So next couple things we'll look at today are photos of the Nile River itself. Again, you can kind of see how on either side of it, it is very desert-like. A lot of sand, a lot of rock. But once you get on either side directly next to the river, it is nice and green. There is a lot of things that are able to grow just because that soil is so good and fertile due to the floods. This is obviously a modern-day picture of Egypt. But again, here you can see all the different fields and things that they have here. And then kind of, you can see where they have their homes and things out on the very edge. And then after that, it's just desert. What's that? Yes. All right. Now, we saw this picture before. If you remember, that was that invention called a shadoof. The Egyptians used it also. If you remember, it was kind of like a weighted system where they could pull water out of the river pretty easily without having to kind of reach over into it and strain. They use this a lot for irrigation as well during the dry season. But there's a modern version of it that they've used in a well. Yeah, they still use them. Now, other things that they would use from the river, we kind of talked about the mud bricks when we were in Mesopotamia also. They still make mud bricks today, really in kind of the same way. You'd have that hard clay. You'd mix some of it with water and pack it into a wooden frame. You can kind of see the wood frame the guy's using down here. You kind of use your hand to smooth off the top. lift the frame off. Then you can see all the ones they've made. We'll just let them kind of sit there and bake in the sun and harden. Yeah. Oh, for a block that size to dry out and harden in the sun would probably take close to a week, if not more. Yeah. To completely dry out in the middle, yeah, it would take a while. Yeah. Now, their pottery was made a little bit differently than this. This guy's using an actual, like a powered spinning wheel. Theirs would have been, they would have had a stick on a wheel that they would have spun the wheels quick as they could. Used their hands to kind of form the pottery a little bit. Take the hands off, spin the wheel again as fast as they could, work it some more. So it took a little bit longer, but the process was very similar. So they could use that same mud, form bowls and jugs and vases and things where they could use to either eat from or carry water, that kind of stuff. Once they let it harden and dry out, it did a pretty good job of holding fluids. So that kind of covers our Nile River and geography stuff. So we're going to switch up a little bit. What you guys need to do now is go ahead and open up your computers and log into your classroom. All right, so once you guys get onto your Google Classroom, you're going to see an assignment where it says Egypt Geography Reading. Go ahead and click on it, and this is the document that it's going to give you. So I'll read it with you first, and then that way you guys can listen first, and then if you want to reread it again on your own to answer the questions on Kia later, you can. But I'll go ahead and read it first. So starting with the Nile River. It says the Nile River is over 4,100 miles long, making it the longest in the world. It runs through northwest Africa and several countries, including Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Burundi. Two main tributaries feed the Nile, the White Nile and the Blue Nile. The Nile River flows north through Egypt into the Mediterranean Sea. Ancient Egyptians divided their land into two regions, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. This can be confusing because Upper Egypt is in the south on the map, and Lower Egypt is in the north. It is named as such because of the flow of the river. So think about it as upstream and downstream. Okay, so upstream would have been Upper Egypt. Downstream would have been Lower Egypt. Gifts of the Nile. The fertile land provided by the Nile River was extremely important to the ancient Egyptians. Egypt is mostly desert, but the land along the river is rich and ideal for growing crops. Wheat, flax, and papyrus were the three most important crops grown. Wheat, used to make bread, served as the main staple food for the Egyptians. Flax, used to make a linen cloth for clothing, was important to the Egyptians. Papyrus grew along the shores of the Nile. The Egyptians used it for many things, such as paper, baskets, rope, and sandals. Many of the gifts from the Nile were used in construction. Mud from riverbanks was used to make sun-dried bricks to build homes, walls, and other buildings. Quarried limestone and sandstone from the side of the Nile were also used in building. The Nile River overflowed the banks around each September and flooded the surrounding areas. While this sounds bad, it was actually one of the most important events in ancient Egyptians' lives. The flooding brought rich black soil and renewed their farmlands. The Nilometer measured the flooded height of the Nile River and helped Egyptians predict how successful their crops would be that year. The flood was caused by heavy rain and melting snow to the south. Ancient Egyptians believed the flood was caused by the goddess Isis's tears as she cried for her husband Osiris. Today, the Aswan Dam keeps the Nile from flooding modern cities in Egypt. Transportation. Most of ancient Egypt's cities were built along the Nile since most of Egypt was a desert. So the river was used like a major highway. Boats carried people and goods constantly throughout the empire. Remember we said back at this time, if you wanted to get somewhere, you had to walk. So, the distance that you would travel was pretty limited based on how far you were willing to walk. So by using the river to get from place to place, it was a lot easier to throw a boat or a raft and let the current take you somewhere than it was to walk somewhere. Seasons. Egyptians built their calendar around the Nile River. It was divided into 3 seasons. The first season, the inundation or Akhet, was the name of flooding of the Nile. Peret was the growing season, and Shamu was the harvest season. So, you guys can keep that open if you want to. You probably need to. But then you'll want to go back to your Google Classroom, use the link to go to Kia, and answer your questions on Kia.